last message on Daniel. Welcome to the end. And, that was not a difficult title to come up with because it's not only the end of the series on Daniel, but it's also the way Daniel presents everything. It's the end of what was and what will be. And it comes to us in this wonderful conclusion that begins for Daniel back in his younger years, and we see he's seated somewhere special. And this goes back to chapter 10 and verse 4. Daniel 10 and 4. On the 24th day of the first month, while I was by the bank of the great river, that is the Tigris. Imagine this scene in Daniel's vision where he's kind of like relaxing. Carl could appreciate this because if Daniel would have had a fishing rod, he'd have been casting and watching the bobber. But he's not fishing, he's just sitting there praying. And in all the quietness and all of the environment surrounding him, we come to this from chapter 12, verse 4. But as for you, Daniel, conceal these words and seal up the book until the end of time. Many will go back and forth, and knowledge will increase. So there's this rippling river flowing by him. There's probably a light breeze, just wafting through his hair and his beard. And the prophecies are over. Wow. But the story isn't. And that's where we find ourselves. There remains one more main scene that comes to us out of Daniel before the final curtain would close and everybody would go home. It's a reality that Daniel marvels at God's amazing plan that's been given to him. And we're going to take these moments to learn how we can find the prophecy is over, but the full story isn't. The full story is not over. And we can best appreciate this final chapter by examining how it unfolds pretty much in three major areas. The individuals that are involved with Daniel, the questions that are being asked, and then the answers that are being given. And this is kind of how we'll go through this. So Daniel finds that there are others involved, not just him. Who are these others? Well, we go to verse number 5, chapter 12, Daniel, verse 5. Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, two others were standing, one on this bank of the river, and the other on that bank of the river. So in other words, these are the messengers of God. We call them angels. There's one nearby him on his side. There's one across the river. And he sees them. And they have been listening eagerly to all this. If we move to 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 12, it was revealed to them, meaning the angels, that they were not serving themselves but you in these things which now have been announced to you through those who preach the gospel to you by the Holy Spirit sent from heaven, things into which angels long to look. Daniel 12 and 6, two angels, one on each bank, and one said to the man dressed in linen, the man dressed in linen, where'd he come from? Who was above the waters of the river. How long will it be until the end of these wonders? Now we have a mystery. Inquiring minds want to know, right? You have one on this bank, one on the far bank, and now one of those angels is talking to a guy who's in fine linen above the water. So that word picture would be, he's like floating. Maybe he's got a jetpack. I don't know, but he's there in between the two angels. Daniel's looking on, seeing what's going on here. And the reality is that it ends up that there are now 4 people down by the river. You got Daniel, you have 2 angels, and then you got this man dressed in linen. Remember, one said to the man dressed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, "How long will it be until the end of these wonders?" This is at the end of Daniel, where he's had all of these prophetic messages in this forthtelling. We call it prophecy, right? Forthtelling, future events. How long will it be? One of the angels says to the man in linen, the mighty angel that we would probably consider to be unique and special. Maybe it was Michael, maybe it was Gabriel. But what we do know is that when Daniel strives to learn the answers and clarify this, his mind is probably still spinning in a great way. Just put yourself in his place, and all of this stuff has gone on. And now he's surrounded by these other 3 elements, 2 angels and he in fine linen. Verse number 8, "As for me," Daniel speaking, "I heard but could not understand. So I said, 'My Lord, what will be the outcome of these events?'" What will be the outcome of these events? Daniel's he's concerned about results. What's going to happen here? And when we move to verse number 7, we know that Daniel is looking for some answers. He's looking for answers. He doesn't get shy about this anymore. I mean, now remember Daniel now's in his 80s. He's having all of this fine stuff that's going on in his life, and he's been exposed to miraculous prophecies about future events, some of which he knew were right around the corner. All of this was going to be taking place. And when we get to verse number 7, "I," meaning Daniel, "heard the man dressed in linen," this is the one floating above the water, "who was above the waters of the river, as he raised his right hand and his left toward heaven, and swore by him who lives forever that it would be for a time, times, and half a time. And as soon as they finish shattering the power of the holy people, all these events will be completed." Time, times, and half a time. 1 year, 2 years, and a half year. You add all those together and you get 3.5 years. Time, 1 year. Times, plural, means 2 years. Half a time means half a year. So we have our 3.5 years. This is the first part of the tribulation. Remember, the tribulation is divided into 2. 3.5 years, stop. 3.5 years. First 3.5 are good. Second 3.5 are not so good. And this is where we see Daniel bringing everything to bear about this horrible half of the tribulation, that the Antichrist would break his peaceful covenant with the Jewish Hebrew population. Remember when he first comes on the scene for 3.5 years? He's Tom Selleck, he's Tom Cruise, he's Mr. America, he's handsome, he's loving, caring. Nobody is displeased with this guy. He's wonderful. 3.5 years. Click. Now he's Dracula. You know, he's the bad guy. He's the Boston Strangler. He's the worst of the worst. And he starts cutting people's heads off and doing this and doing that, all this evil. So we realize that after the Antichrist breaks this peace agreement he had basically in Jerusalem, he persecutes Israel and all the people that were in his charge. And the reality for all of those is that the people that had faith, would be put into a difficult position. Second part of Daniel 7:25. "And he will intend to make alterations in times and in law, and they will be given into his hand for a time, times and a half a time." So this is the time where the Antichrist is at his worst. And when this angel who's floating above the water, he raises his right and left hands up towards heaven, and he makes this solemn pledge that what God has promised is going to come true. At the darkest hour, when the persecution is the worst, when all of those who are around at the time of the persecution of the Antichrist is going on, God basically screams, "That's enough. It ends. No more." And the clouds part, Christ charges down from heaven, and he is going to deal a crushing blow. Daniel 9:27, and he will make a firm covenant for many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he will put a stop to a sacrifice and grain offering. This is the Antichrist and how we get to this point. He will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering, that means in the temple. And on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who makes desolate. Moving to chapter 8, verse 24. His power will be mighty, but not by his own power, and he will destroy to an extraordinary degree and prosper and perform his will. He will destroy mighty men and the holy people. All of this is what's unfolding in that second 3.5 years of the tribulation, when the Antichrist is at his highest point of power. And when it speaks of him destroying mighty men and the holy people, that basically means all those who are believers in Yahweh, Jehovah, or the Christ. He's going to get rid of all of them. He has nothing to do with any of them. He doesn't want them around. He doesn't want to have this as a part of his life now. Get rid of everybody. But he also knows the clock is ticking. He's heard the prophecies. He's read the scrolls. He knows exactly what's going to happen when his time is ultimately up. Daniel 11:45 we read 2 weeks ago. He will pitch the tents of his royal pavilion between the seas and the beautiful holy mountain, yet he will come to his end, and no one will help him. In other words, he's built his whole organization around the holy mountain, which is Zion, which is Jerusalem. Here he's the big cheese, and all of a sudden things start to go awry, and no one's going to help him. Satan has no power at this point. And we realize that when the angels start to tell us more about all of this, we get very specific. And this is one of the wonderful things about forthtelling, future-telling prophecy. Daniel 12:11. From the time that the regular sacrifice is abolished, okay, when he stopped temple worship and the grain offerings, first 3.5 years, when he stops it, here we are. From the time that the regular sacrifice is abolished and the abomination of desolation is set up, that means the destruction of all of God's people, the believers, there will be 1,290 days. 3.5 years. I didn't make that up. Daniel put it in his prophecy 500 and some years before Christ was born. This is how long it's going to be. 1,290 days. 3.5 years. And when we consider the reality of what all of this brings to bear, we stop and scratch our heads a little bit and we say, wait a minute. If we remember, originally, we went through this whole series of dates and days, and it was, first of all, 1,260 days. If you check your notes, everybody check your notes. Amen? Everybody check your notes from last week and the week before. It was originally 1,260 days. But there's a different calendar involved here. We talked about our calendar. We talked about the Jewish calendar. Now, Daniel's in Babylon. Babylon doesn't use the Jewish calendar. They used the Persian calendar. Pretty cool, huh? So we have different accountability here for what constitutes a year. 360 days or 365 days, which is what we use. So the Jewish calendar, the Hebrew calendar, is 360 days. We use 365, 7.5 years. You add 30 years. So in Revelation, which we will get into next year, doesn't that sound good? Next year we're going to talk about Revelation. Chapter 14, verse 17. And another angel came out of the temple which is in heaven, and he also had a sharp sickle. And another angel who has power over fire came out from the altar, and he called with a loud voice to him who had put the sharp sickle, saying, Put in your sharp sickle and gather the clusters from the vine of the earth, because her grapes are ripe. So the angel swung his sickle to the earth and gathered the clusters from the vine of the earth and threw them into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden outside the city, and blood came out from the winepress up to the horses' bridles for a distance of 200 miles. People would read that, and your first thought is, I think I'll throw up. You know? But the reality for this, and this is some of the stuff that this gal I was talking to the other day on the phone, she's talking about Revelation, and she's like, this is terrible stuff. The reality for us is what we're seeing here is we have all of this going on, and this is future time telling. And when John the Revelator exposes what Christ has instructed through the discussion that he had with John on the Isle of Patmos, he's talking about what we consider to be called the Battle of Armageddon. Harmageddon in Hebrew, Harm, H, where maybe as many as 10 million opposing soldiers come against Jesus. 10 million? I mean, they totally surround the nation of Israel, and there's no one to help. Everybody has abandoned Israel. Sound familiar? Everybody's abandoned Israel, and here they are. And Jesus comes down and says, with his sword, he speaks a word, and 10 million are gone. And their blood fills the valley of Jezreel, the valley of Armageddon. And in essence, what's being discussed here about these angels coming down with a sickle is a word picture of what's going to happen when the Battle of Armageddon takes place. Except it's not an angel with a sickle harvesting grapes. It's the word of the Lord saying, be done. And all these people were eliminated. Said, basically, it took about a month to dispose of all the bodies that were killed in that one moment. That's 30 additional days till the Lord takes over. Complete control. 30 additional days. That's 1,290 days. This is fun. Yeah? I mean, there's a lot of stuff here that we got to really work to wrap our heads around it, and I have to concede that a lot of this stuff I had to change things over and over and over so it made sense to me, and then hopefully it would make sense to you by transference, right? And when you think about something like a wine press with blood coming out that's going to be up to the bridles of the horses, holy moly. You know, the Jezreel Valley, the Valley of Armageddon, by the way, this fellow that I follow, Amir Tsarfati, that lives in Galilee, his backyard overlooks what? The Valley of Armageddon. And he says, one day I'm going to look out there and I'll disappear. And then there'll be things happening there and it's going to be crazy. But in that valley, because it's at the crossroads of civilization and all the traffic that would come from Egypt going north into Lebanon and Syria and Iraq, Persia in those days, all the traffic would go through there and the kingdoms would fight over it. This kingdom would fight to control the valley. This kingdom would fight to defeat them. And there were battles that took place there where hundreds of thousands of soldiers died. Imagine that. The armies from the Pharaoh of Egypt come and they get confronted by Nebuchadnezzar's army, the Babylonian Empire, and they have this big battle. Where do they hit? Right in the middle of the Jezreel Valley. And they have this big battle. And in that particular case, the Egyptians lost. Nebuchadnezzar's army won. The Egyptians went back to Egypt and never tried to do it again. And there you have hundreds of thousands of dead people laying in the valley. And it takes time to clean all that mess up. And lots of history takes place in this place that's going to be the future of mankind. So when we think about fulfillment of prophecy, when we think about the reality of how all of this goes, we see things happening that today make us have a kind of a concern to worry about tomorrow. But just keep smiles in your hearts, because all of this stuff that's going on does not affect people who are in Christ. Doesn't affect that. Matter of fact, we won't even be knowing about it because we're going to be singing in the church choir in heaven. Yeah, it's going to be a good day. Everything is going to be fine. When the angels get involved here and they see all of this stuff going on, they're as inquisitive as we are. Because remember, nobody knows the hour but, as Jesus would say, my heavenly Father. Michael, Gabriel, all these other angels, nobody has a clue when all this is going to unfold. All we do know is there'll be a time when God says, okay, let's pull the trigger, and we're raptured, and then it begins. Tribulation. We can't be sure about all of these changes in days that come to us from 1260 to 1290. But what we do know is Daniel makes another revelation here in chapter 12, verse 12. How blessed is he who keeps waiting and attains to the 1,335 days. Didn't see that coming. 1,335 days. What's up with that? Well, we know that Christ is going to need time during what's known as the second resurrection. All of humanity that has passed is going to go before the great throne judgment. We talked about this last week, the book of life. Everybody's going to come up to Christ and he's going to say, okay, we don't have any Franks in here, right? Okay. Frank, I see what you did. Too bad for you. You're going to the smoking lounge. Off he goes into eternal damnation. And Greg, you did good. You get to go to air conditioning. Off he goes into heaven. And all of these people are going to take time. Whoa, what's the count of people that have been in existence from Adam till now? And that includes all the people that were kind of like went swimming during the flood. Think back to the beginning of time. Billions and billions and billions of people, souls have been on this created earth. And all of them have to be judged. And that's one of the neat things about God's calendars. You don't need an appointment. No, because he doesn't have a watch, right? God's time is eternal. It doesn't matter. You want to see me tomorrow? Well, it's tomorrow. Days 1,000 years to the Lord. So here we see all of this is going on. What's with 45 additional days? Well, the sense would be that it's going to take time for Christ to judge the Jews and the Gentiles and those who were the tribulation saints. And then it provides him time to, I believe, set up his millennial reign government. That's a scary word, isn't it? Christ setting up a government. That's not so scary. Because whatever Christ puts in place is going to be cool. It's going to be good for everybody. And that's going to be for the 1,000 years following the tribulation. There has to be a sense of order, and all this has to be taking place. Daniel 12 and 9, he's basically talking to Daniel. He said, go your way, Daniel. This is the floater, the guy with the jetpack, right? He's saying, go your way, Daniel, for these words are concealed and sealed up until the end of time. Many will be purged, purified, and refined, but the wicked will act wickedly, and none of the wicked will understand. But those who have insight will understand. Those who have insight will understand. Daniel is concerned about his people. And the angel wants him to know, hey, it's okay. Don't worry. Everything's going to be fine. Those who have insight will understand. That means people who acknowledge Yahweh, Jehovah. Those who are in line with the law, and they're a part of the life of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they're going to be fine. Don't worry about them. What we do need to do, though, is this. He said, do not seal up the words of the prophecy of the book, for the time is near. There's going to be a time, as the Apostle John tells us, that all of this stuff that Daniel has prepared the world for through the prophecies, everything's going to get exposed, and we're all going to be good to go. We will have been lifted up. Everybody else is going to be involved in this situation where they will know exactly what's going on. Romans 2 and 5, but because of your stubbornness and unrepentant heart, you are storing up wrath for yourself in the day of wrath and revelation of the righteous judgment of God. These are those people that lack understanding. Don't want to be a part of those people, because they're going to be stuck here and they're going to have to go through a mess. In what Daniel comes to us within this last verse, verse number 13 of Daniel 12, is this. But as for you, remember this is the angel talking to Daniel, go your way to the end. Then you will enter into rest and rise again for your allotted portion at the end of the age. In other words, the angel says to, or this linen-wearing floater says to Daniel, hey, don't worry. You're going to go into rest, and then you're going to be resurrected at the end of time. You're going to be brought to life just like everybody else. And that's the reality of what we see it's involved for all of us. He wants Daniel to carry on, just like he wants us to carry on. You know, one foot in front of the other, keep going, everything's going to be okay. Good people are going to get better, bad people will get worse. God's people during the time of the tribulation are going to be what we could call purified or refined. Those who make a decision during the tribulation to worship the Lord as Lord and Savior. But the wicked people are going to go deeper and deeper into the darkness. They're going to be farther and farther removed because they've, as we will learn in Revelation, they've accepted the sign of the beast. Good advice for believers at any time is to never, ever, ever stop acknowledging who your salvation is through. We cannot quit our faith journey that Jesus came to heal each and every one of us, to keep us to that point of creation where we are eternally His. That's our decision. We make it. No one forces it on us. It's freely given. It's knowing that we have this advice that comes our way to carry on until the end of time. And Joanne read this for us in the reading from 2 Thessalonians. I won't go through the whole thing again, but basically what he's saying is the whole purpose of our lives is to stay balanced. To realize that we have the opportunity and the ability in our living to make sure that we're doing the right things at the right time for the right reasons. That's why it's so difficult today. Small commentary. to look around what's happening in our country and to see the devastation on our college and university campuses. To understand the fact that these are people who are praising a terrorist group because that's all they're doing, and saying things like death to America and, kill the USA and kill another soldier and all this kind of stupid stuff. When we have the ability to stay balanced in our faith journey, we realize there's not a gray area. There's a black and there's a white. There's a good, there's a bad. There's not a, okay, temporary. There's none of that. You either are or you aren't. And in the context of our faith journey, you are either a believer or you're not. And in the context of being a citizen in America, you're either a citizen or you're not. And when we see things happening that are going on all around us like this, it's no wonder that we have so much discontent and fear in our homes and in our lives. This is the old adage when we were growing up, and most of us are of an age that would recognize that you didn't have to lock all the doors and you didn't have to worry about somebody breaking into your car and carjacking you at the mall or the shopping center, or some guy sneaking up behind you when you're standing on the sidewalk. And as we saw yesterday in New York City, put a belt around a woman's neck, choked her out, and then raped her, left her laying in the street. But they got him. It was all on video. That's the good thing about video today, that they caught the guy right away, put the woman in the hospital. But we didn't worry about stuff like that. Different time. And all of this leads us to the reality that what Daniel talks about, what Ezra, Nehemiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel all talk about, and John, the beloved, talks about, and Paul, the apostle in Thessalonians and Ephesians, talks about, and Matthew in his gospel talks about, and that's the reality of what the future holds for humanity. And that's why we're talking through these messages like we are. I ask a bunch of people, how many sermons have you heard from Daniel? What kind of answer do you think I got? What kind of sermons have you heard on any of the Old Testament major prophets? I hear a lot of preaching about Paul, about the Gospels, a lot of preaching about that. And that's important because we need to know what the gospel is. Christ came to live and die and live again that we might do the same, right? That's the gospel in a nutshell. But so many people won't get in behind a pulpit, and I say people, I mean pastors, won't get behind a pulpit and preach Daniel because it makes people uncomfortable. I'm sorry if you got uncomfortable during this series, but it's necessary to understand. Without the Old Testament, there is no New Testament. And every once in a while, we just have to hunker down and hear all this bad stuff. And Paul gives us a picture in the New Testament about what it's like to have been a Jewish leader. He was a Pharisee of the Pharisees. He was a high up. He was a big shot. And he went to the lowest point of life because he became a follower of the Nazarene. He was kicked out of his own family and all of his own relationships because he followed Christ. Imagine that. And what we've learned from Daniel is that there's some things that are important for us. And this is how I'll close. The more time we spend with God, the more teachable we become. The more time we spend with God, the more teachable we become. The most impressive thing about the book of Daniel is not the fiery furnace. It's not fun Sunday school stories. No. What's teachable is the fact that Daniel constantly and consistently prayed. That's what's significant. That's the teachable moment from Daniel. Secondly, the more questions we ask God, the more dependent we become to Him. when we are trying to figure things out. And I have to admit, I've been asking a lot of questions the last several months because a lot of stuff I didn't know. I mean, it's one thing to take a class in seminary about Daniel and you read it and it's like you get a passing grade and you move on. But to read it in depth, to understand it in a significant way, that just took time. Reading it over and over and over and thinking, what does this mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? The more time we spend asking questions with God, the more dependent we become on Him, and that's a good thing. Third, the more truth we discover about God, the more profound He becomes to us. Isn't that crazy? The more we learn about God and what everything He tells us in His Word, in this Libros, library in the Greek, 66 books, the more we learn what this says and how it applies to us, the more we find the truth of God and how it applies to us in our lives. It's crazy. And when we see God in the book of Daniel, we're actually looking at Him through the eyes of these angels, whether it's two angels on the riverbank or this person in the linen that's floating above, which we perceive to be Christ. This is how we're seeing humanity unfold for God and His plan for us. We have these powerful telescopes that we look up into the cosmos and we find galaxies all the time, and we're talking about places that are hundreds of millions of light years away. How far is that? Eternity. I don't know. I just know that at one point in time they weren't there. Wonder how they got there. The atheist would say there was a big bang. Well, there probably was a big bang. God probably went bang. And He created the heavens and the universe. So we come to this point where we find the more truth we discover, the more profound He becomes to us. And then lastly, the greatest lesson from Daniel's book for us is the reality of what King Nebuchadnezzar would say. And we'll conclude with that. And it has to be the great lesson is the awe of God Daniel showed us. This last week, last Sunday night, I went with Melissa, my daughter Melissa, and her husband Dennis. We went down to E.J. Thomas at Akron U and saw the Phil Wickham concert. Zowie, okay? I think remember I told you last week we were going to be in row 1, row A? Well, we got there, and we found out there's also row AA that doesn't show up on the seating chart because it is reserved for friends and family of the performers. So actually there were 4 rows in front of us. But we got our picture in the big thing. Anyhow, it was marvelous, and it was all about worship. And we're going to close with the song today that Sue requested. Just happens to be timely, okay? So we'll do that here at the end. But we're going to do, right now we're going to read the words that King Nebuchadnezzar, remember, this was the strongest man in the world. He had the largest army. He had the largest empire. Babylon was this impregnable fortress, and he had no worries in the world until he had a dream. And that's what started Daniel's rise to fame. So this is what we're going to read from Daniel 4 and 3. Together, book, chapter, verse. Daniel 4:3. How great are His signs, how mighty are His wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and His dominion is from generation to generation. And that's why I believe when we get to eternity, we might even get a chance to meet Nebuchadnezzar, because he resolved the fact that Yahweh, Jehovah, was in fact the God of the universe, the creator of all things, and for us. This is Phil.